Kitty, coming to Hong Kong on her marriage, had found it hard to reconcile herself to the fact that her social position was determined by her husband's occupation. Of course, everyone had been very kind, and for 2 or 3 months they had gone out to parties almost every night. When they dined at Government House, the governor took her in as a bride. But she had understood quickly that as the wife of the government bacteriologist she was of no particular consequence. It made her angry. "It's too absurd," she told her husband. "Why, there's hardly anyone here that one would bother about for 5 minutes at home. Mother wouldn't dream of asking any of them to dine at our house." "You mustn't let it worry you," he answered. "It doesn't really matter, you know." "Of course it doesn't matter. It only shows how stupid they are. But it is rather funny when you think of all the people who used to come to our house at home that here we should be treated like dirt. From a social standpoint, the man of science does not exist," he smiled. She knew that now, but she had not known it when she married him. "I don't know that it exactly amuses me to be taken in to dinner by the agent of the P. And O," she said, laughing in order that what she said might not seem snobbish. Perhaps he saw the reproach behind her lightness of manner, for he took her hand and shyly pressed it. "I'm awfully sorry, Kitty dear, but don't let it vex you." "Oh, I'm not going to let it do that. It couldn't have been Walter that afternoon. It must have been one of the servants, and after all they didn't matter. Chinese servants knew everything anyway." But they held their tongues. Her heart beat a little faster as she remembered the way in which that white china knob slowly turned. They mustn't take risks like that again. It was better to go to the curio shop. No one who saw her go in would think anything of it, and they were absolutely safe there. The owner of the shop knew who Charlie was, and he was not such a fool as to put up the back of the assistant colonial secretary. What did anything matter really but that Charlie loved her? She turned away from the veranda and went back into her sitting room. She threw herself down on the sofa and stretched out her hand to get a cigarette. Her eye caught sight of a note lying on the top of a book. She opened it. It was written in pencil. "Dear Kitty, here is the book you wanted. I was just going to send it when I met Dr. Fane, and he said he'd bring it round himself as he was passing the house. B.H." She rang the bell, and when the boy came asked him who had brought the book and when. "Master bring it, Missy, after tiffin," he answered. Then it had been Walter. She rang up the colonial secretary's office at once and asked for Charlie. She told him what she had just learned. There was a pause before he answered. "What shall I do?" she asked. "I'm in the middle of an important consultation. I'm afraid I can't talk to you now. My advice to you is to sit tight." She put down the receiver. She understood that he was not alone, and she was impatient with his business. She sat down again, at a desk, and resting her face in her hands sought to think out the situation. Of course Walter might merely have thought she was sleeping. There was no reason why she should not lock herself in. She tried to remember if they had been talking. Certainly they had not been talking loud. And there was the hat. It was maddening of Charlie to have left it downstairs. But it was no use blaming him for that. It was natural enough, and there was nothing to tell that Walter had noticed it. He was probably in a hurry and had just left the book and note on his way to some appointment connected with his work. The strange thing was that he should have tried the door and then the 2 windows. If he thought she was asleep, it was unlike him to disturb her. What a fool she had been. She shook herself a little, and again she felt that sweet pain in her heart which she always felt when she thought of Charlie. It had been worth it. He had said that he would stand by her, and if the worst came to the worst, well, let Walter kick up a row if he chose. She had Charlie. What did she care? Perhaps it would be the best thing for him to know. She had never cared for Walter, and since she had loved Charlie Townsend it had irked and bored her to submit to her husband's caresses. She wanted to have nothing more to do with him. She didn't see how he could prove anything. If he accused her, she would deny. And if it came to a pass that she could deny no longer, well, she would fling the truth in his teeth, and he could do what he chose. Within 3 months of her marriage, she knew that she had made a mistake, but it had been her mother's fault even more than hers. There was a photograph of her mother in the room, and Kitty's harassed eyes fell on it. She did not know why she kept it there, for she was not very fond of her mother. There was one of her father too, but that was downstairs on the grand piano. It had been done when he took silk, and it represented him in a wig and gown. Even they could not make him imposing. He was a little, wizened man, with tired eyes, a long upper lip, and a thin mouth. A facetious photographer had told him to look pleasant, but he had succeeded only in looking severe. It was on this account, for as a rule the downturned corners of his mouth and the dejection of his eyes gave him an air of mild depression, that Mrs. Garstin, thinking it made him look judicial, had chosen it from among the proofs. But her own photograph showed her in the dress in which she had gone to court when her husband was made a king's counsel. She was very grand in the velvet gown, the long train so disposed as to show to advantage, with feathers in her hair and flowers in her hand. She held herself erect. She was a woman of 50, thin and flat-chested, with prominent cheekbones and a large. She had a great quantity of very smooth black hair, and Kitty had always suspected that, if not dyed, it was at least touched up. Her fine black eyes were never still, and this was the most noticeable thing about her, for when she was talking to you it was disconcerting to see those restless eyes in that impassive, unlined and yellow face. They moved from one part of you to another, to other persons in the room, and then back to you. You felt that she was criticizing you, summing you up, watchful meanwhile of all that went on around her, and that the words she spoke had no connection with her thoughts.